Good afternoon, everyone. We welcome Balázs Lengyel. I'm similar to the English because we have some guests. Balázs, the floor is yours, and you have about 60 minutes to talk.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to present this work. This is a joint paper with a couple of co-authors. Let me just move the computer. Here back myself.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so welcome again. So this is a joint work with co-authors from quite a few places. So this is a joint work with Kristóf Kutasi, Júlia Koltai, Ágnes Szabolmai, Lengyel Balázs, and Péter Bíró. And I would like to start with telling the story how this project started. It was, I think, May when Péter wrote us, many of us in England, that we should look into the question how vaccine hesitancy looked like in the third wave in Hungary, because we had a unique case, because the number of available vaccines was highest globally in the country, and this is an interesting topic to look at, because probably we can understand something about vaccine hesitancy. So we contacted Yuri because she, with Gergely and Malcolm, were running the mask survey, which was used to construct mobility and meeting matrices for the country. This was used to model virus diffusion and consult with the government. And they were running the survey over months, and we were able to insert some questions into the survey in early June. And then we decided to analyze the data that we get from this survey, and also decided to continue the project and ran an own survey initiated from KTI. We did this analysis really quickly over the summer because we thought it was important to feed in some new insights, because we all know that information is not fully available for us about the vaccines and the whole situation. But then it took some time until we could finalize the paper. And now this is in review, and we already have written comments from Dani, which we really appreciate. But you will see that there's still discussion is very much open. So if you have any comments and any critiques, then we are here to take bullets. And I hope that we can open a discussion, because the project is still going on, and I and Peter are still working on the topic. So this is just for making the context, but the real research context is the third wave and the vaccine campaign. We all know, at least Hungarians, we know how this went on. So, but let me kind of start with kind of offering a research problem, and Because vaccine development, we all know that this was unprecedented during last years. So never before there are so many vaccines available for a single disease. And vaccine development is really quick, and the introduction of these vaccines are very quick. So all the authorities had to introduce these vaccines on the emergency basis, so before the final authorization of the health authorities. So at the end, we came up with a situation in which a lot of type of vaccines came out and were used. So we all know that we had very new generation technologies, the mRNA type of vaccines, and we had more established technologies like vector-based or whole virus type of vaccines. And the literature, so in countries in which more vaccines were available, when the individuals had to decide whether they want to get vaccinated or not, because this was a year back, this was still a question that they could decide, they had to face a risky decision, because information on the efficiency and health impact was not full. So when they faced these risks and couldn't see the benefits, then their hesitancy was largely influenced by misinformation, of course, political battles and battles of these companies and the whole fight against or among companies as they wanted to dominate the market. And so the experience was scarce and experience was accumulated over time. So the literature was converging. When we started this work, the literature was converging in the finding that demographic characteristics and personal beliefs were really important in characterizing whether an individual was hesitant against the vaccine or not. So these papers in Nature Human Behavior and Lancet Regional Health, these are just examples showing that those individuals who are lower educated, low income, have low income, they are more hesitant than average. Also, people found previously that trust in government increases hesitancy versus belief in conspiracy theories increases hesitancy. This is something we would expect, of course. However, what none of these papers have looked at so far, I think we were the first. No, I'm sorry, I have to start from this statement that the heterogeneity across vaccines might be important. And this was the problem that we wanted to calm, because vaccines are really different, as we see that there are many technologies, vaccines are coming from many countries, so probably the hesitancy might also differ when an individual must decide or must face this problem to get vaccinated or not. So the previous papers that touched upon this problem were from the two survey samples from France and Israel, and they found that the country of origin and the type of technology used is really important. So some of the individuals are hesitant against some vaccines or would be hesitant against vaccines coming from certain countries and are not hesitant against vaccines coming from other countries. The same story for technology. Some of the individuals reject some of like one or certain type of technologies, but on the other hand, they accept other technologies. So we were interested in this type of heterogeneity because these previous papers could only answer or look into this question by hypothesizing the heterogeneity of vaccines, right? In these countries, in Israel and France, the choice was not given for selecting vaccination or the type of vaccines. So these authors asked the respondents whether they would reject a type of vaccine if they were offered to. This was a niche that we jumped into because actually we have data and we could see these preferences and how they work in real life. So a slide about the vaccination campaign in Hungary, and we know that I said already that the Hungarian vaccination campaign, it was unique in two senses. First, in here we had 6 vaccines introduced already third wave. We had the EU purchase, which was Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Janssen, and the Hungarian government went its own way and purchased Sputnik and Sinopharm from Russia and China. So this is outstanding globally, according to our World Data website. There's another unique feature of the Hungarian campaign, which was unique for the third wave, but is that the individuals could reject the vaccine and wait for another one, which was not the case, at least in the rest of the EU. Individuals in most of the countries, or as far as we know, in most of the countries, they went to the vaccination point, and then that was the time that they first heard about the type of vaccine that they would get. On the contrary, here individuals could reject an offered vaccine and wait for another one. Just a few quick facts. Vaccination was among the quickest globally and remained high in Hungary among Central Eastern European countries by the end of the third wave, and hesitancy fell from 53% in January to 20% in May, according to this survey I mentioned. All right, so this is the context and something about the data. So the survey is claimed to be a nationally representative survey, and it includes 1,000 individuals who were contacted by phone, and a lot of questions were asked. So this was a really long survey, and we just could enter a few questions. So the survey collected detailed socio-demographic information about respondents, detailed health information, and vaccination history. So what type of vaccine and when did the respondents get? That was an important information. And we could ask what vaccine the respondent rejected at that. Then another very important information that our analysis was based on was about the evaluation of vaccines. So each of the 1,000 respondents were asked to evaluate every of the available vaccines on the scale from 1 to 5. 1 was, so that's an unacceptable vaccine. 5 meant that vaccine is the best. And finally, we could also ask the respondents who they follow when they decide about vaccination. Do they follow scientists or doctors? Do they trust the information that they get from scientists or doctors? Do they take the advice of politicians or celebrities? Do they trust these anti-vaccine guys, or do they accept the advice of families or family of friends? If you have any questions, please shoot. So this was a very rich survey, and we looked into it, and then just I'm summarizing the findings. So first, let's have a look what we see in this sample.
Can you tell us a bit more about the survey itself, so about the sample size and how the sample was constructed? Because it's a phone survey, so how did the survey agency get their phone numbers? Just to understand the background of the.
Yeah, that's a very good question, but I don't have an answer for that. So yeah, I'm sorry. But we can ask Julia about that. She was in contact with this company. Yeah, that's all. That's all we got.
No.
They didn't want to make a survey with Turkey because they had okay, it's not, but it's 1,000 persons of this is a representative sample including 1,000 people, and it's done by mobile phone call. It's very similar to what Turkey does, but it's another company called Sinopharm.
Okay, so in the sample we can use this sample actually. We can use this information to look into a lot of questions about hesitancy that was not asked before in other papers, because we see that how individuals evaluated these vaccines. Whether they evaluated the vaccine unacceptable, or we can see whether they evaluated one vaccine available but evaluated other unacceptable, but evaluated other vaccines acceptable. We could also see whether they rejected the vaccine before they got vaccinated or not. So this is new information, and what we see here is that actually this information is important, because almost 20%, 18% of the sample evaluates one vaccine available, unacceptable, I'm sorry, but evaluates another acceptable. So almost, if this is a really representative sample of the country, then this is a large number, I think. And clearly shows that there is a heterogeneity in acceptance of vaccines, because every fifth individual is not accepting a particular vaccine, but is open for others. When it comes to rejection, and we call rejection the act that the individual was offered one vaccine but did not accept that. In the sample, every 10%, every 10th individual did this act, which is also a huge number, and it's really interesting to look into the patterns more in detail.
Can I have a question?
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, then according to the last line, less than 15% of your sample is non-vaccinated, while in the society it was 32. So isn't it a problem that in some dimension the survey is not representative?
In this, you mean in here?
Yes.
So if you add up 11.7 and 14.5, that's 26.3, which is indeed below the actual hesitancy measured in the country, which was 32%. Yeah, that's true. So probably that the respondents who are willing to participate in the survey are not. I mean, this is biased towards openness for vaccines, and probably some of the hesitants refuse to answer. Yeah, that's true.
Interestingly, if you look at education, then those who have a high school education are the most hesitant or than to reject. We have some idea why we see there's some spike.
I don't have an answer for that, but probably this comes from the distribution that follows the education background in the country. So,
Sorry, but that's not a relative distribution, but that's not so. So there are more high school educated than non-high school educated. But on the other hand, just to reply to Lengyel and Balázs, so when I was reading this paper, I actually checked how representative this is. They compared it to the census, and it is not that. And I checked the education levels and the age distribution and men and women, and it's not far off from those.
thank you. This is really good news. So, yeah, I hope that everyone heard. It's a good example. What we see here is that generally, like first ones, women, younger cohorts, overeducated, no chronic disease individuals are more likely to reject the first offer, the vaccine. So they are more willing to review preferences, even in a very risky situation, because that's what. Yeah, I'll come back later. So let's have a look how the timeline looked. So here you see all the individuals. We have a question from online. I got something that probably this is not. So here you see all the vaccinated or all the respondents, and then who got at least the vaccine until the end of May. And you see the day when the first vaccine was taken. Okay, and then you see on the y-axis the age of the respondent. The hollow markers show when the first vaccine was taken without rejecting another. Okay, and these field markers mean that when the first vaccine was taken, previously the respondent rejected at least one other vaccine. Okay, and then the colors mean so this darker color means that the respondent had a chronic illness. This lighter color means that the respondent has no chronic illness. So what we see here is basically this follows probably the picture that we all have about vaccination. First, the older generation of the country was vaccinated. Then came the younger ones, and this of course has an impact on the two cohorts that we see in these reviewed preferences. You probably can see that in around March, when the older generation was vaccinated, then those who rejected a vaccine before, by that time, were of course the older generation. And then around May, when the younger cohort got the first vaccine again, then here you see that some of them have rejected a vaccine as well. Okay, so this is pretty much what we have experienced a year ago, almost a year ago. Then we can look at 5 vaccine types. So I mentioned we had 6, but Janssen was introduced quite late, and in the sample we only saw very few individuals who got actually Janssen. So we decided to focus on 5 vaccines: Pfizer, Sputnik, Sinopharm, AstraZeneca and Moderna. And here's still the timeline without the age and chronic illness dimensions, but you can see that Pfizer and Sputnik was introduced earlier than other vaccines, but of course these revealed preferences. So when individuals could actually choose another vaccine starts from March, and then you see quite some heterogeneity here. So again, the field markers mean that the vaccine was accepted, taken after rejecting another. So here you see some heterogeneity, and then we were interested how this selection looked like. So what vaccine was rejected before accepting and taking which other vaccine? So I created this network in which we have these 5 vaccines, and then a arrow points from one vaccine to another vaccine. When somebody rejected, for example, the arrow from Sinopharm to Pfizer is means that a quite big number of individuals rejected Sinopharm before they accepted Pfizer. Okay, the wider these arrows are, the more people. Here you see, yeah, this is here you see the percent of those individuals who are in this sample. I only created this network from those individuals who actually rejected the vaccine and then accepted another one. Okay, so here we see only this 10% of the sample, or actually a bit more. Okay. Yeah. So first, yes.
Clarifying question. So what does rejection exactly mean? So if I just wait until I get the Pfizer, but I do not in fact reject it, but do not go to my doctor to get it, is that a rejection, or do I actually have to say no?
Yeah, rejection. Yeah, that's a very good question. Rejection means that the respondent was offered the wrong vaccine. So, for example, I was told by my doctor that I can have AstraZeneca now, because it's middle of March. Do I accept or not? I did, but I know some others who did not and waited for other vaccines. That's a really good question, because and that's a problem that's a matter of discussion, and the limitation, of course, in this paper, that the rules in the campaign and changed very dynamically over time. So first, of course, nobody could choose a vaccine. It was given, Pfizer was given to the chronic illness and all generation. Sinopharm as well, we know all the drawbacks. But later these rules changed, and yeah, that's the definition.
In the question of how is it best, because it could be that I know cases when the doctor calls somebody and offered 2 vaccines, let's say Sinopharm and AstraZeneca, but the respondent said no, I want to wait for Pfizer. So in this case, how do you record that? So what was rejected, Sinopharm or AstraZeneca? Both, or
Could be both. Could be both. Actually, there, as I remember the survey questionnaire, there is no clear solution for this problem. I think we could have a look at this, because we know when the rejected vaccine, when rejection happens, we know that. So if that's on the same day, of course, if we're accepting another one, then probably we capture the problem that you mentioned, but we didn't consider this really in detail. I'm not sure that there's really good information for that.
Actually, what we asked is, we asked the respondents, when was the first time you were offered a vaccine? They told the date. Which vaccine was it? They told it. Did you accept it? They told it. So if there's a case which you say that they were offered 2 types of vaccine, if they answered truly, they answered with announcing both vaccines and telling whether they accept it or not. So theoretically, if they remember and wanting to give a detailed answer, they did have an opportunity to do so.
Sorry, I don't like this graph, but does it take into account the amount of vaccine available? So from Moderna to Moderna, the errors are quite slim because the quantity of Moderna was not that. Wow.
You're totally right. So we don't take into account this on the time dimension. So of course the supply of vaccines kind of determines this, and also the behavior of individuals. And this is I don't see the full complexity of this problem. I think this is something that Ari and Peter are looking at right now. So this is a complex problem, including, of course, really the time distribution of available vaccines, the number of cases, because probably the risk that one faces infection is higher than in the middle of the wave than outside of it. Availability of vaccines, future availability of vaccines is also something that is not fully understandable, I guess. At least in this country, it was not really clear when new vaccines will come and how this will look like. So, yeah, so this doesn't take all the complexity into account. This is just a quick view showing the sample, and I think it has few important insights offering. So most of these individuals, of course, rejected the vaccine, waited for Pfizer, we know that. But this graph is almost fully complete. So it's almost a complete graph. So you see almost all the combinations of rejection and acceptance, which is something that really captured it was a surprise for us. And because I mean, who would? Yeah. Okay. So the fact that Pfizer is the most preferred one was not a surprise, but the availability of combinations was. So we looked into this problem. So this is actually the problem that we looked into and asked the questions that are needed.
Those little details of Sinopharm and AstraZeneca are these things that are people who actually rejected Sinopharm and picked Sinopharm?
Yes. Yes. Probably because they were waiting for something, waiting for another one. There was no available other vaccines, so decided to take Sinopharm. Yeah. Okay. So the first question we asked. So now we're going to use two types of information. First, the evaluation of the vaccines. So now each respondent was asked to evaluate the vaccines. So unacceptable, acceptable, really good on the scale. Now we looked at what personal characteristics can explain the evaluation of the individual, which is unacceptable. So which personal characteristics can predict that the individual does not accept the certain vaccine? To answer this question, we run linear probability models with robust standard errors and do some robustness that you see on this graph, on the slide. And then we include a lot of personal information. But one problem we had to tackle was that probably it's not just the trusted source of information that matters, but also the channels, information channels transfer that type of information about vaccines to individuals. For example, it might be the case that the individual is following COVID news on Facebook, and then this load of information influences him or her to be hesitant. So we decided to run a lasso before we selected the explanatory variables and throw all the information into this variable selection step. And what was convincing is that the source of the channel of information fell out of most of these models. However, the advice, the trusted source of advice from different sources remained in these models, suggesting that in our case we could focus on the source or the trusted source of information, could leave the further complexities out, that the individuals are reading this or that news or following this or that TV or Facebook or whatever. Okay, so we ran these linear probability models for each of the vaccine types. Here you only see the point estimates and the robust standard errors, and the vertical lines are, I mean, then you see that the dark colors mean that the coefficient is significant. In all these models, we have these 996 respondents because we left those out who got the Janssen vaccines. So that's the number of observations. And we have two types of explanatory variables. First, the socioeconomic variables, which include the age, the sex, higher education or not, city category by size, whether the individual is smoking or not, whether he or she got a chronic illness, whether there was COVID previously, whether the COVID was serious previously. And here you see that some reasonable findings. So, for example, those respondents, I mean, women were more likely to evaluate AstraZeneca unacceptable than men, which we know that was a scandal like a year ago, that AstraZeneca was a serious message, especially for women. So that's something we see here, which tells us that it's not a complete disaster what we do. But I think the more interesting stuff is on the top of this plot, because there you see what type of source of information is that these respondents trust about the vaccines or vaccination in general. And I would like to focus on the top four lines: doctors, scientists, anti-vaccine propagators, and politicians. And I think the most interesting thing is that, like, okay, we see two things. First, these point estimates more or less in the same direction. Okay, so those who follow doctors and scientists and trust them are more likely to accept all of these vaccines, but that's only significant for Pfizer and Moderna. Those who follow the advice of these anti-vaccine guys are more likely to reject or do not accept vaccines, but it's only significant for Pfizer and Moderna. Those who follow politicians are more likely to accept vaccines, but that's only significant for AstraZeneca, Sputnik, and Sinopharm. And I think this also supports the idea that there is a heterogeneity in how individuals accept or hesitant are about against these vaccines. And probably there is the trusted information is really important. Of course, this is something we could think, but we find here that actually there is a divide, seems to be a divide between types of vaccines and and certain groups of individuals are more likely, I'm just more likely to accept certain types of vaccines, but other individuals are more likely to accept other types of vaccines. I hope this makes sense.
Thanks. Okay, I have two questions. Do you see in the data what they worked? Because I can imagine that if I work at a supermarket or I work as a researcher at home, I would have very different preferences or like sense of urgency to get a vaccine. And the other thing is that if you look at those coefficients, for example, on anti-vaccine propagators, they are not significantly different from zero in the last three cases. However, those are probably not significantly different from each other between Pfizer and AstraZeneca and all the rest.
Yes,
You should test this.
yes, we should, and this is a comment we already got. And thank you for raising the issue again. This is on the top of the list of the to-do list we have. But so you're right. About the occupation thing, I think we have occupation categories. We didn't check those, so this is something we do. Sorry.
One last comment. You can also, what you could also do is actually, so there are two things here. One is a somebody's vaccine or anti-vaccine in general. And in theory, you have a trend here. When you pull all this and just say that, they rejected or not rejected any vaccine. This is why everything moves to the life. So in each person, you can observe that. So I don't know how you do it economically well, but you can also do something like do a pool model of this, but when just say that okay, those who are at all got the vaccine, they are more likely probably listen to doctors and science, less likely to anti-vaccine programs. That's one statement. I'm pretty sure that's what I found. And compared to that, you can test whether those who actually got Sputnik are different, are they, and separate for each.
I think we can do this. So this is, yeah, thanks.
Comment to your question. So actually, in the other survey, Turkey, that was conducted in August, we had more specific questions about not just the work, but also the work conditions. So whether they had the opportunity to work from home, and not because in this March survey, unfortunately, only so the question was only about the last week. This was surveyed at the end of May, but in this new survey, Turkey asked about this period, and exactly actually that's what factor that we would like to investigate, whether being at home, working from home can increase the chances of rejection and the rating for preferred vaccine, obviously. And the other potential factor can be the health risk, like if somebody is really young and healthy, and probably is more willing to wait for the preferred vaccine. And actually, that's something that we always have in mind, that this can be actually very beneficial for a society. I mean, if this vaccination is selection based, so self-selection based basically. So it's giving us a sorting, which can be ideal, because who will get the vaccine first? Those who are really needed, because either they are risky, they have high risk to catch COVID because of the work, they have to go to work, and the other is those who are more at risk to have a fatal or bad outcome if they catch the risk. Like, for instance, obesity is one factor where you don't get priority, but still it's a factor that will influence your risk. So maybe obese people would a rationale to accept the early offers. So anyway, I don't want to speak too much, but actually I wanted to say that those who would like to join us, this topic survey is still to be studied, so you are very, very welcome to join and participate in this second part of the research.
Very good response. Thank you. So, okay, thanks for the comments and the critique. Let me just jump over this, which shows correlation and the number of respondents who changed their attitudes towards vaccines over the period. You know, so that information also ran a robustness. The regression didn't change the results. Let me focus on this, which was done by Christoph. And here we combine information on vaccine evaluation, which will be a number that goes from 1 to 5. 1 is the worst, 5 is the best, with the information on rejection, whether the individual has rejected a vaccine before they accepted another one. So here you see all the columns. So individuals are organized into this matrix into these columns by the actual the taken vaccine. So all the individuals here you see those who received Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, etc. And then on this axis you see the evaluation of these individuals, how they evaluated Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, etc. And then we calculate simply the mean by rows. So here you see that, of course, and let me focus on just one thing when comparing this matrix to this matrix, because here you see those individuals who did not reject any vaccine. Here you see those individuals that rejected at least one vaccine before they got vaccinated. And a clear transition we like to see is that, of course, this diagonal, the values in the diagonal increases in most of these cases, which is biased, of course. So if you get the vaccine, then you are likely to think that the vaccine you got is good. However, these cells around the diagonal are really interesting to look at. So, for example, here, Pfizer takers who took a Pfizer after rejecting another one evaluate Moderna better than the rest of the group. Okay, vice versa, that's the case for Moderna takers or Pfizer. A very interesting thing is that those who got Sputnik slightly evaluated Sinopharm better than the rest of the group, saying that probably there is a divergence in vaccines, probably correlating with the type of technologies used in the vaccine development. Here, the last matrix shows those values when an individual was assigned a vaccine but rejected it. So here you see those individuals who verified Pfizer but rejected Pfizer, and then rejected Moderna, rejected AstraZeneca, Sputnik, Sinopharm, and then you see the evaluations there. And unfortunately, these columns are not really reliable. There are very few individuals who rejected Pfizer and Moderna, so we cannot really evaluate these columns. However, this part of the matrix is really telling, because those who rejected Sinopharm and Sputnik, of course, they evaluated Moderna and Pfizer way better than the rest of the vaccines. So here, again, you see some differences across vaccines.
Can I have a question about this?
Yeah.
So if I remember correctly, then there was 180 people who rejected something and accepted something else later on. If I remember correctly, there was 180 people who rejected something and accepted something else later. And here you have plenty of categories in this table. So I'm wondering whether you can make somehow a statistical inference, whether these differences are actually statistically different as well, or how to do it.
There's no, so you are right, we cannot claim statistical differences. So here we just see the averages and the standard or the deviation is reported in the supporting information. I cannot recall. You are right. These numbers are low. So this is a signal and not a proof of. But what we see and still we believe that we can say is that all these findings point towards a picture which is, I think, we think is important to ask this question, whether these preferences are heterogeneous and what does this mean for society. This is just further support for these divergent preferences. Here I created this graph by the co-acceptance of vaccines. So just putting whether a individual, so the edge represents the number of individuals who accepted Sputnik and Sinopharm or Moderna and Pfizer. And here you can see that, of course, these edge rates should be normalized. I decided to put the raw numbers because I think they also clearly show that individuals tend to co-accept vaccines, but they tend to do not co-accept certain vaccine pairs. And finally, one information that comes from the TACU survey, and in which we look at vaccine evaluation, or my colleagues Peter and Christoph are looking at evaluations of Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Sputnik, and Sinopharm by these rows, whether the individual trust in government is low versus individual trust in government is high. And here you see just the fraction of acceptance by rows. And one tiny observation is that so those individuals who trust government and accept Pfizer have a lower percentage than those who do not trust government but accept Pfizer, which is not the case for Sputnik, in which trust in governments really strikes in taking Sputnik, but yeah, so you see these contrasts. And this is the point. So we think that trusted source of information is important, and there is heterogeneity in vaccine preferences. So I come to the last slide. The time is running. So the summary is that we find divergent preferences, and in this case, then vaccines, I mean, the situation was really risky. So someone rejected the vaccine, to wait for another one. That's a very strong review preference because the situation was really risky. So that situation creates the opportunity to understand vaccine hesitancy, and we find heterogeneity in there, in which we think that's technology that matters. So probably technology divides the society. Some is taking this technology, the other is taking that technology. Politics and trust in government also matters. Probably, that's probably true. But the major kind of statement or question, or take it as you wish, is that probably the free choice, the possibility to reject a vaccine and take another one is good for society, because then evaluation will be better, and then acceptance in general will be better. And we also think that a diverse portfolio is also good for society, because then this heterogeneity in preferences could find better matches and better solutions. Okay, that was it. Yeah. You have questions?
Yeah. Is there a way to assign objective quality measures to these vaccines? Can we say that Pfizer is better in any objective sense than Sinopharm? And if we can, would that matter in terms of your results or just interpreting the results? What we have seen is that most people actually just, like the Pfizer with it, which is supposed to be, I guess, best vaccine. I don't know, but can you say that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, but it demands a very difficult answer, because in the time when these individuals must decide which vaccine to go for, I'm not sure that that available information is sufficient to have this decision. So I mean, all these vaccines were introduced on an emergency basis without having a lot of evidence what is going on. So I think that in these situations, when new novelty, innovation, new vaccines, whatever, are introduced into society to think about and decide which one to take, probably there will be some who take the newest and presumably best, because I think most of the people thought that Pfizer was the best, but other people thought Sinopharm was the best. I also know some guys who thought that Sinopharm was good because that Bill Gates will not modify DNA. And then the question is whether this is good or not, and it's a very difficult question. But we think that probably diversity could help acceptance. That's the thing we want to say.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but
No.
the
No question without microphone.
sorry, the trial documentations of most of these vaccines are publicly available. And for example, I think if I remember correctly, the Pfizer documentation was already available at that time. However, the documentation of Sinopharm and Sputnik was not, which doesn't mean that those are better, but at least somehow more transparent.
I agree. I don't want to debate with you on that. But some would, I think. So we know how these fake news work, and some don't care about that. Some care, but certain groups, government, within others say, and I think that's the question, whether increasing diversity or availability of different types could help or not. We think it could. Of course, we cannot enter the really hard debate on health outcomes, and we don't want to. That's it's not our task. Actually, this whole research is a bit out of the topic of most of us. But yeah, that's always a question.
Yeah. Do you hear me?
You.
Yeah. May I ask?
Yes.
Okay. So I have two concerns. First, that you are assuming that the preference is something which is quite stable. You only allow one possibility, namely that if the individuals were changing their preferences within the observation period. But the better representation of the preferences would have been to make it conditional, right? Because people didn't know anything about what is the time horizon to have the vaccines available in different categories. And people were rather underinformed, and not only those people, these individuals, but also the source of information was very underinformed, say the GPs or any other source of information was rather lacking that type of knowledge. Second, I think that your claim that the offering different kind of vaccines may contribute to reduce the hesitancy. I think this claim can only be substantiated if you are comparing, so to say, your results with other countries where there was no offer of that type of variation. So I think that you have to think twice whether you are seeing those results as supporting that claim. Thanks.
Thank you. I try to respond to answer the second. Yeah, we know that these cross-country comparisons would be really good. The problem is that, of course, lack of data, lack of countries. What we see is that actually Slovakia had 5 vaccines available, and I think it's reasonable to assume that trust in institutions and culture is similar across Central Eastern European countries, and hesitancy was lowest in Hungary, which is not, of course, something that we could use for claiming causality, but still that's an observation we cannot forget. The other thing is you're absolutely right about how the dynamics of preferences, so they might change really quickly. Yeah, the AstraZeneca example is clear for that. Thank you, Peter. We've seen there's a paper that Julie Gerlőst and Marta Kartai are writing, because they have followed preferences from January until summer, and some of these preferences were stable. So Pfizer and Moderna was stable, AstraZeneca was of course not stable, and cannot recall. They are writing a paper about that. So you're right. Did not see a way to control for this in this exercise. I think this is something that is still coming. So probably again, I want to say something about it.
The first one. Your turn.
It's going back to my earlier question with this rejection. So first of all, when you estimate the rejections, I would be really happy to see a result also for the acceptance. So how, well, we have some expectations that we expect there, but still it would be nice to have tables not only for the rejection, but so having an outcome, the acceptance of the vaccine, because I can reject something only if I am offered it. So I don't see this to our actually.
Just let me clarify, that's not rejection that we ran. So that dependent variable here was evaluation. So if you evaluate a vaccine unacceptable, then you have 0. If you evaluate the vaccine acceptable, then you have 0, and then unacceptable is 1.
Okay.
So that's dependent and not rejection.
Okay, so it's not, but then it's not really reviewed.
It's not reviewed. In the regression, it's not reviewed, of course. Let's see up to that this time.
Danny came first.
The two questions. One is minor. When we say trusting government, what's the question about trusting Fidesz or trusting government in general? Because in the literature it matters a lot.
In here, I don't remember, because that's from the KTI survey.
Sorry.
Trusting government in general, as in in many of the European surveys, the trusting government is something that you trust the institutions. Or was it about trust in what the current Hungarian government says? And it's quite different, the
Just the
interpretation.
government, I think.
In general or fetus. So that matters a lot.
Well, it's like, do you trust in government?
So,
And you
but,
can,
but is it the same question as you take it from the, it's probably Julia from the European Social Survey, but they have these trust
well, I
questions?
think it's what we did.
So this is the Turkey survey, no, it's not the most.
Okay, but not really. So
It's the ESS.
it's a yes question. Okay, so in trust in general, in government in general. Trust in these.
So I think you trust in the government, in the government, that's what it is. I think in the government for 10 years, that's quite, yeah, straightforward, I guess. It's really hard to be theoretical.
I think not, because if the question is like, I think,
We
you know,
didn't ask in general,
okay.
we asked in the government.
Okay, you'll have a problem with this, but but that's my second point is rather a comment on a question that I think you should be rather better off dividing the whole analysis not by these 5 vaccine types, but dividing the vaccines into 2 different categories. I mean, two times 2 different categories. One is based on, let's say, where the government, where we have that. So you have Moderna, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca, which is the EU vaccines, and then you have Sputnik and Sinopharm, which is the Hungarian government vaccines. This is one division line, I think, and it would be very interesting to see the same analysis what you did so far based on this division line, especially because you have quite few number of cases and a lot of categories, so you would increase the power substantially. Second division line is based on the type of the vaccine, so Moderna and Pfizer together, and AstraZeneca and Sputnik together, maybe Sinopharm is the third one. So whether, you know, that's a different type. Whether you trust the new methods, type of things, and then basically you put AstraZeneca in the other category. Because I think it matters in the decision of what sort of vaccine you want to get. And so you when you look at the in your question that what affects the acceptance or the declining of the vaccines, you went for A, who you believe, whether it's scientists, government, or anti-vaccine programs, and the other was the government. So basically, my point is that yeah. So basically, you have doctors, scientists on one end, and when you in my mind, when you believe doctors and scientists, you go for the mRNA and new methods. But on the other hand, when you go for politicians and the anti-vaccine propagandists, sorry, then you would, then I think the decision is between the non-government and government vaccines, so Sputnik and Sinopharm versus the AstraZeneca, Pfizer and Moderna. There's these 2 lines.
Thank you for your comment. Just one quick remark. So here the number of observations are the same for the full all 5 models. So I think that's a really good and easy thing to do to kind of combine these vaccines by several dimensions. So we can have we can combine them by technologies. So new technologies, kind of recent technologies, old technologies, and then EU accepted and not. So we can do that, of course, to clarify a little bit more what dimension matters in this divergent preference that we currently have.
We had one question from the audience. May now speak.
Can I ask my question?
Yes, okay,
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First, a practical question. We are all Hungarians. Is there a reason to speak English because of YouTube or?
Yeah, we have foreign guests here. Yeah.
You mean later on? Because right now we are all Hungarians.
Online, yes, but on site.
I see. Okay, thank you.
This means you were late.
Sorry?
This means you were late because we announced this at the first 5 minutes.
No, I joined before one, but the sound quality was not always good. So I knew that it was announced, but I didn't get the reason for that. That's why I was asking for clarification. I have questions, whether two or three questions. My understanding is that you assume that there is a rational decision. Is there a way to, depending on the question, depending on the questionnaire, is there a way to separate rational and emotional decisions in this respect? I'm asking this because in my circles, I saw both types of decisions. So I'm not sure whether it is possible to separate these different types of decisions relying on the data you have. My second question is about your claim or your potential implication that a selection, a possibility to select of various types of vaccine might reduce hesitancy. So one question is whether it is possible to separate data concerning that period when registration was obligatory, as opposed to the last months or few weeks when you can go to a vaccine station without registering, and then you in most cases you have a choice. So if you can separate data for these two different periods, that might give some further information. But the trouble is that there are claims that several people were not really hesitant to get vaccinated, but they were hesitant to get registered because they have realized that the data offered to the government were used for other purposes as well. So even in case you can separate these two periods when registration was not obligatory on the one hand, and you had a choice of vaccines indeed, as opposed to the previous period, then even in this case, you have two major factors. One is the availability of vaccines at the vaccination stations and no need to register. Hopefully my question is clear.
Yes, thank you, Attila. So you had two questions. One is about the rationality of preferences and choices, and the other one whether we could differentiate different regimes of this vaccination campaign, that the individuals had to register to get vaccinated without registration. And I think this registration thing, so it was so obligatory registration was released, I think, or and put aside around May. I don't know, I cannot remember, but there were some like short periods when one could go to the vaccination stations without registration, and because Pfizer was available for a few days, and there were lines in front of hospitals. So the thing we did in the regressions were simply adding month fixed effects to control this heterogeneity, but I think it would be a good idea to I'm not sure if it's possible, but to look for information in the survey whether someone has registered or not. The other question is a bit more difficult to answer because I'm not sure whether we could infer emotions from these surveys. I think we collected, did not use, but there is information available on reasons why they rejected and why they rejected some vaccines and why they evaluated some vaccines unacceptable. So we could look into these texts we don't have energy for that, so we didn't use that information. But yeah, that could be, I think, used.
Just a small remark. Actually, I think it is related to one of the comments made by Laszlo about the dynamics of preferences, because so depending on the availability of data and trustworthiness of sources, people might have changed from being emotional to being rational, or the other way around. So whether it is a constant behavior, whether there is a constant pattern in their hesitancy versus acceptance, that's really a big question. But I don't think that it's possible to answer.
Yeah, there's a lot of limitations of this data. So it's a cross section without any further controls. So there's a lot of drawbacks, and yeah, probably you're right. We cannot infer too much, but yeah.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I suggest we continue with the discussion over the sandwiches. So, Balázs, thank you for your excellent presentation.
Thank you for the comments.